Bonjour ladies and gentlemen, it is Traeger Terry here. I am back with another tasty Traeger treat for you. Today we are going to be going low and slow. We are going to be cooking pulled pork. First things first, I've got to remove the skin and the fat from the massive pork shoulder that I have before me. So I'm just going to get straight in there. I've never done this before, I've never removed the skin, or I've done a bit of fat removal. But the idea is we're just getting rid of this top bit. The thing is what we're going to keep this top bit, because although it's not going to add much flavour to our pulled pork, I can use this later to make crispy crackling. The top bit of skin, layer of fat is removed. Lovely. This won't really add much flavour to the pulled pork, I don't think, so I'm just going to cut it off, and like I said, I'm probably going to make a nice little batch of crackling with that later, so I'm going to put that to one side, and I'm just going to quickly go through this and pull off some more of those fatty bits. I really want it to be quite, you know, as meaty as it can be, so again, I'm just going to get kind of stuck in here and start pulling off those fatty bits. Right, so that's a good handful of fat off it. I'm happy with that. The more fat I can get off it now, the easier it's going to be later on when I come to pull it. I won't be having to pull out as many fatty strands. I'm going to turn on Randy, start getting him heating up. I'm going to put him on 120 and we're probably going to cook it until it reaches about 60 Celsius internal heat, which could take anywhere between an hour to 3 hours. So just going to fire him up, and then we're going to move on to the exciting part, the rubs. Today I'm going to use a wet rub followed by a dry rub on top, so I'm kind of going to layer up some flavours, which should be quite exciting. So first of all, my trusty apple spritz spray. So I'm just going to spray that on this side to begin with, and then we'll come back to that in a little bit. So first things first, I'm going to get the hot sauce in there. I really don't want too much of this because this is super hot. So just a couple of tablespoons perhaps of this. Next I'll Worcestershire sauce. And last but not least, English mustard, which is very strong and quite spicy. So I'm going to use a good fingerful of this, throw that in there, and literally just get hands on and mix this all together. And we've made ourselves some kind of really nice yellow goop. And we're literally just going to lather this straight onto the pulled pork. The bottom in there too. Now we're going to create the dry section, and then we're going to sort of pat that on top of it before sticking the probe in it and throwing it in Randy for potentially 3 hours. So I'm going to start with sugar. So like I said, I've got quite a lot of spices, quite a lot of tangy flavours in there, so I'm going to combat those with the sugar and then the apple juice. Garlic, paprika, cumin. I'm going to add a bit of ginger. That was probably a bit too much ginger, but we'll go with it. We'll see how it tastes at the end. Chili powder, smoked paprika, cayenne pepper, salt, and then pepper. So that's kind of the basis of my dry rub, and I'm just going to pat this all over the pork shoulder, and it already smells delicious. Now my pork shoulder is dressed to impress. It is sauced up, rubbed up. Now it's time to insert the probe. What we want to do today, like a lot of the times when I'm cooking big cooks, is cooking to temperature. So for the first half of today's cook, we want it to be going up to 60°C. So I'm just going to put this in the midsection, in the thickest part, avoiding the bone, because the bone will really deceive your thermometer. Randy, like a good one, is now up to temperature. He got up to temp in the time that I was seasoning my pork shoulder. So what more could you ask for? He's a good companion. And that's it. Now I've just got to throw him on the grill and wait and see how it goes. So I'm just going to open her up, shove it on, and then every half an hour or so I'm going to come out, spritz with apple juice, keep an eye on the internal temperature, and just go from there really. Good work, Randy. Good work, Terry. I'll be back soon. It has been about 3 hours. Randy has been working away in the background at a nice 120. I have been coming out here every half an hour to check on the internal temperature and as well to spritz a little bit. I'm going to, very professionally as I can, get out the pork joint using my massive fork here. Ah yeah. Close that for a minute. Right. There we have it. So that's 3 hours cooking time so far. Potentially another 3 hours to go. If you've got a bigger pork shoulder, a bigger joint, you know, it will take longer. That's fine. That's kind of why we go for the internal temperature more so than actual cooking time. This is one of the smaller pork shoulders that I have cooked because there's only going to be a few people eating it essentially. So I'm just pouring in my apple juice, pour a bit on top. This is just going to help it steam, so when it cooks for the next section with the tin foil over it, it's just going to sort of steam the apple juice and it's going to keep that moisture really locked in there, which is just really what we're going for with pulled pork. We don't want dry pulled pork. That'd be terrible. So trusty tin foil. I'm going to layer this on a few times because I do want quite a tight seal. That is nice and secure. There he is, looking beautiful. Really tighten it up around the probe as well. You kind of don't want too much moisture to be released. We want to keep it all in there for the last few hours. Okay, so that is my pork shoulder now covered up. We're going to throw him back in Randy. We're going to keep monitoring the internal temperature. We're on 63 now, so another 20 Celsius to go. Going to keep checking it probably every hour now just to see how the temperature's coming along. Going to keep it at 120°C, keep it a consistent low temperature, and then after this is done we're going to pull it out and let it rest. So back in he goes. Fits nicely on Randy. And that's it. I'll be back soon. I'm back. So in total it has been about 5.5 hours. Randy has been working away. The pork shoulder has been cooking in there slowly. Now the internal temperature is 96, so we're aiming for anywhere between 91 to 95 ideally. So we've gone a little bit over, but that's fine, I'm not too worried about it. So I'm going to pull the pork shoulder out, I'm going to remove the probe, and I'm going to relocate inside and let it rest for an hour. So as tempting as it might be to lift that tin foil up straight away, you're going to release loads of moisture and loads of that steam, so really carefully remove your probe. I'm using my heat-proof gloves because I really don't fancy burning my fingers. And really carefully remove the probe, just slide out there, put that to one side and then quickly reseal this foil. I'm going to give it about an hour because everyone in the house is getting quite hungry. So that's it. Randy's work is done. I'm going to put him to bed for the evening. I'm going to relocate my pork shoulder inside, and then in about an hour's time we're going to start pulling it apart. What I'm going to do now is bring in a second baking tray so I can move the pork shoulder onto the second baking tray, leaving all the juices in the first baking tray. It's just going to make it easier for me to pull apart the pork in this new baking tray. We're not going to get rid of those juices, we're just going to put them to one side for the minute, and then later on we're going to put all that meat back into the juices and let all the meat soak up those juices again. So do not throw it away at this point. So first things first, I'm going to open up and reveal the pork shoulder. Reveal, get our first look. It still feels kind of hot, so do take caution. Ta-da! Wow, look at all those juices. That is the reason we are moving to a second tray to pull it apart, because that's a lot of juice. So I'm just going to lift this and also test how hot it is at this point. It's still pretty toasty, but it's not too hot that you can't handle it. So the sign of good pulled pork is that you should just be able to pull this bone out here. There probably will be a few bits stuck to it, but we'll see if we can yoink this out. Doesn't matter that there's some stuck to the bone still, because ultimately we're going to be pulling all this off anyway, and we're going to be pulling it, so don't worry if you have got a few bits. And it will just, it's so tender, you can just literally see it just sort of crumbling in my fingers. That's what we want. We know it's good pulled pork. Then we're just pretty much going to dig in to the rest of the meat, really. So the other important part of this is we're going to be removing as much fat as we can. We don't want all these fat chewy bits. And if, like me, you're a bit worried like, oh my god, how do I know what fat is? It's like this. It's tough. It'll be quite stretchy and it'll be a lot paler than the rest of your meat. So just throw that to one side. We don't want that. That's not going to add any flavour. That's what pulled pork should look like. All these little juicy fibres. Can get these little claw things that help you pull it apart, or you could just use forks, but when you've been cooking it for this long and it's kind of this soft, I like doing it by hand. You can see some bits are a bit drier than others almost, and some are like super moist. Don't worry about that, we've saved our juices. We're going to give all of them a delicious bath, and they will be soaked up as we go along. Right, okay, so that is pretty much all my big bits crushed down into little bits. So now we're going to go through it by hand and make them to even littler bits. Still scouring for fat, because you will get bits just attached to little sections. Just pull them out. Simple job. And this is, I think, five and a half hours this was cooking in total. Another hour and a half to rest. And then literally now it's just playtime for me, just digging through it, pulling it apart, admiring the masterpiece. Once you're kind of starting to get happy with a few of the chunks, just start throwing them back into your juice. Just get them started soaking up all that leftover apple juice and all the flavours, because as well as the apple juice, it's going to have soaked up all of the rub and all of the sauce that we put on it to begin with. It's all going to have collected in the bottom of that pan. So we're literally just going to throw it back in there, and re-add those delicious flavours to it. We're not wasting. This is my last little section of meat now, going back into the original tray, soaking up those juices. So I'll just scoop up the last little bits, don't want any of it disappearing, going to waste. So all I'm going to do now is just get my hands in there, and I'm just going to mix all this meat into the juices that were left behind. Now that the meat's opened up and I've shredded it down, it's just going to reabsorb those flavours over time. And there we have it, pulled pork Traeger Terry style. It's great on pizzas, sandwiches, calzones, whatever you fancy. Give it a go. If you like this recipe and you'd like to see more, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks guys!